What if we did something new every day? Could be something small, like putting your socks on in the opposite order, or something huge, like going skydiving in a chicken suit. This is what Asmara Kazmi has been doing for the past 3 years. Well, not the chicken suit part, I think, but she has been trying something new every day for over 1,000 days, and it's given her a whole new perspective on life and on how we should be running our businesses. Instead of thinking of companies as simply places to make money, she sees the potential for something much bigger and better. Imagine if we created organizations that were medicine for a sick society. Bold? Yeah, but so is skydiving in a chicken suit. If we follow through on Asmara's vision, we can expect businesses to protect and encourage health in all forms: financial, personal, mental, and structural. Provide timely, tangible, transparent education. Empower autonomy by providing meaningful engagement and support, and avoid toxic systems that force individuals to internalize structural shortcomings within the organization. TLDR will desuckify work by putting trust in people to do more than they think they're capable of. That would certainly be a new experience for most of us. Let's follow Asmara's lead and give it a try. All right, Asmara Kazmi, welcome to the DesuckifyWork Podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. This is precisely the podcast anyone should want to be on, so thank you.
We have a lot of work to do in the desuckification part of the world, that's for sure.
We have.
Well, I'm excited.
We'll never be out of a job, you and I, right?
Exactly. Yeah, that was a smart move on our part. Well, before we go too deep, I want to give people a chance to get to know you. So what's your story? What do you do for work, and how'd you come to be doing it?
Yeah, absolutely. So my background was in psychology and medicine. I was going to go to medical school, and after I graduated from college, I started working with some doctors, and I realized that nothing about the American healthcare system promotes health for anybody. Patient, practitioner, only the people who profit from it. And I was like, yeah, me being the empathetic, systems savvy person I am, staying the course on this is a recipe for burnout or worse. So I listened to my inner intuition and was like, right, this is not the way I get to leverage my gifts and service. Awesome. So I parked that, and in the interim ended up moving to the UK. And after I moved to the UK, I kind of just fell into operations consulting because I had spent pretty much my entire life thinking about systems, more specifically the body systems. But the beauty of system dynamics is the basic principles apply irrespective of what, type of system you're thinking about. So I took a lot of that cross-functional learning and applied it to business, and it turns out I was damn good at it. And I was consulting with one of the UK's largest banks, and I gave them like a very long list of things that they should correct pretty quickly. And they were like, yeah, sure. It was, you know how it is, DJ, one of those email chains has 40 people on it that you just have to send robotically every single week, but ain't nobody right?
Yeah.
So it turns out that the things that I had highlighted to them that they choose to ignore, they got pulled up by their regulatory body on it and got charged 162 million pounds.
Oh, geez.
Running joke is that's how much it costs to not listen to me. So
I like that.
Tell everybody. So after that experience, I was like, you know what? I think that I need to go it alone. I need to do my own thing. So that's what I do now. My company, The Ops Room, has existed for 2 years. And recently I've done kind of a Doctor Who style regeneration of what I do and how I do it and who I do it for. But basically the TLDR is, how do we create healthy businesses that can be medicine for a sick society. So
Hmm.
that's here.
That's all. That sounds easy.
Yeah, super easy.
Piece
Super.
of cake.
I'll knock it out in like, tomorrow over lunch and it'll be fine.
Exactly. I mean, I do appreciate the perspective there, though, that that healthy businesses could be medicine for society. I mean, I think I want to open that up maybe just a little bit, and in your mind or in your experience or both, what what does that look like? What does a healthy business look like, and how are they helping society heal?
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the things that I talk about often is the hallmark of a toxic system is it gets the individuals in it to internalize its shortcomings. We
Hmm.
see a lot of that in business. There is a lack of accountability, there is a lack of structure, there's a lack of insert any number of things here, and that becomes the problem of the people who don't actually have the requisite power to change it. And
Mm-hmm.
that up with these really, really unhealthy businesses, even though their balance sheet might look great, but
Mm-hmm.
there's a found rot on the inside.
Mm.
Um, and I apply kind of the same lens to any system, really. So the thing that I tend to come back to time and time again is a healthy system does three things. And if it doesn't do these three things, it deserves to be dismantled
Okay.
immediately. So it protects and encourages health in all its forms,
Mm.
innovation, and autonomy.
Mm.
So forms of health, especially when it comes to businesses, it's like, okay, financial health, because we live in capitalism.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, anyway. um, uh, the resource health, if you will, the people in it, like how are they engaging with the work that they're doing? Are they
Mm-hmm.
being worked out by it because of all of the things I mentioned previously?
Mm-hmm.
Mental health, which is a big, big thing that nobody thinks about. Like everyone treats ESG as either like a really flowery talking point or just a nice cherry on top of a very subpar cake. And it's like, no, no, no. It's not the cherry, it's like the flour and the eggs. It can't be forethought. So
Yes.
those the three kind of and of course for businesses, structural health. So
Mm-hmm.
in what ways are the actual infrastructure of the business set up to support the health of not only the business but the people in it, from the tools that they use to the processes that they adopt to the policies they purport to the
Mm-hmm.
purpose they allegedly have, like all of those things need to be in alignment. So then you have information. So it
Mm-hmm.
needs to be timely, tangible, and transparent.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, I love a good alliteration. It is my toxic habit. Deal with it.
I'm on board with that one. So great.
Finally, autonomy. Have you empowered the people who are in the business to do their best work by providing them the aforementioned things? And
Mm-hmm.
is continuous process of engaging with them to see what they need so that they can better serve the needs of the business and also look after themselves in the process. Because I
Mm.
think a lot of especially larger corporates are set up as this kind of either or false dichotomy, like
Mm-hmm.
either hustle and you just do all the things to get to the top, but by the
Mm-hmm.
time you're like burnt to a crisp, if you
Mm-hmm.
worked you would be thrown in the bin. Like
Yes.
so it's really about like looking at it not only multidimensionally, but also over time and also in the context of the other wider systems that that business exists in.
Mm. I I'm curious if you have seen anyone close to this level of delivering the health that you're talking about here.
Um, no, see
Yeah.
previous
Fair.
comment about never being out of a job.
Yeah. No, I mean, it's interesting because as you describe this stuff, I mean, of course, it all makes sense. I mean, none of it's like, wow, we shouldn't have that. But my brain goes to like, can we really have this? I mean, like that's I think the tension that shows up, and what are the forces that are keeping us from having it? And I mean that maybe in two ways. One is, why don't we have systems like this for the most part? And then if we try to shift our systems to be more like this, what are some of the forces that make it really difficult to do that?
Yeah. Oh, I love these questions. You are really damn good at this. I'll tell you that. So the first thing, and this is something that I cover in my book as well, it's called Paradigm Playground, is
Mm-hmm.
things that we have is a radical crisis of imagination. The
Mm,
reason why we struggle and often fail at materializing the alternative is because we can't fathom what that alternative looks like.
mm,
Like, I talk about what does a healthy post-capitalist society look like? And people are like, oh, do you want communism? Do you want Marxism? Do you want socialism? And I'm like, no, how about we stop taking direction from dead dudes who could not fathom what we have now and where we are now? You
mm,
know, modern problems require modern solutions, and we have more than enough resources, brain power, and talent in this world to make it happen. So,
mm,
first and foremost, I think the problem is business as usual persists because we continue to do things in the same way.
mm-hmm,
And that sounds like a really, circuitous reason, but that's the thing at the heart of it. And the
mm-hmm,
thing I talk about in my book is 3 years ago, as a way to manage my own mental well-being in all these tire fire systems, I challenged myself to do something new every day for 30 days.
mm,
And at the end of the 30 days, I was like, this is just how I live now. Like,
mm.
I'm stopping. And that was 3 years ago. So I'm like, I don't know, 1,100 and something days in. Like, you can tell I don't keep track because I'm just like, oh, this is just a way of life. It's not something that's like 75 hard that I'm like, oh,
Mm-hmm.
I'm on day 42 and my God, do I hate my life? It's
You're
like,
doing the selfie into the camera, like, oh my God, am I going to make
I'm
it?
just shaking. Yeah,
Yeah.
no, none of that, none of that.
Yeah.
So
Okay.
that's in order to materialize different outcomes, we also need to do things differently. And
Mm,
that's the thing that we keep fighting back against because we've enshrined what we believe are best practices. But
mm-hmm,
I would argue they were never best anyway. But even
mm-hmm,
if they were best in some very defined level, very defined kind of sandbox,
mm-hmm.
they're irrelevant now.
Yeah.
So we really need to act as if we are in a climate emergency, act
Mm-hmm,
as if that people have options because they do, act
mm-hmm,
as if that things like equality aren't just like these nice things that you give keynotes on. There are things that can actually be lived.
mm,
Uh, so that's the first thing. And then when it comes to what are the forces that are keeping us here, so one really awesome thing about what we have right now is it is set up to inspire what is called a systems trap.
mm,
So it is something that comes from a lot of people, but the person who approached this most clearly, I think, is Donella Meadows in her book Thinking in Systems. So she
okay.
talks about what are these traps that systems fall into as a result of how their dynamics exist.
Okay.
One of called the success to the successful. And what happens in the success to the successful, I think you already know where I'm going with this based on that facial expression, is that the more you invest in something, the more it's able to magnetize more resources towards it, often
Mm-hmm,
at the expense of other things.
mm,
So the thing that teaches us is twofold. Firstly, what are the things that we are actually investing in? Right?
mm-hmm,
And what does that look like? And there are avenues to this that people don't think about. So, for example, I gave a speech to the Leeds City Council last week.
okay.
Um, I encouraged them to pressure one of the largest pension funds in the UK to
Mm-hmm,
divest from arms dealers, fossil fuels, dubious tax. Because
mm-hmm,
if the hope that the things that we invest in grow, what kind of world are we materializing through the choices that we make today?
mm.
If peace and you make war profitable, I got some bad news for you, fam. You know? So
Yeah.
it's so there's that level of awareness
Mm-hmm.
that by the wayside because people are they're thinking about returns on a far shorter time scale than they
Mm-hmm.
should. What they're doing instead is they're throwing resources at things that actually long term are going to screw us all.
Mm-hmm.
So there's that aspect of it. And then there's also the fact that like, you look at the large multinational corporations, like smaller businesses can't compete with that, right?
Mm-hmm.
Thing is that those same large corporations, because they're so large, because they have so much power, can then attract more power and more
Mm-hmm.
sway things,
Yeah.
right? So it's a combination of those two things and very many others, but those are kind of like the main meat and potatoes of what we really gotta get right.
Yeah. And again, as you say it, I think, okay, we can do that. Um, but those forces are strong, right? I mean, there's this tension that you uncovered here it's interesting. I just got an email about this from an assessment provider that I work with, and it's like there's sort of two different kinds of people and forces in the world, and they're not necessarily either one is better. But there's some folks who really want to change and challenge and do new things and kind of what you're talking about, and then there are folks who want to kind of create a certain amount of order and systematizing around that. And the world needs a certain amount of balance potentially between those two. But what I hear and what you're saying and what we observe a lot is the largest, most influential organizations and systems in our world, even if they started on the side of wanting to challenge and change and do things. I mean, you look at some big corporations, tech corporations that started about like, wanting to like dismantle everything and change everything. And then of course they get to where they have enough power. And of course now they want to hold power and maintain. So there's this weird dynamic that we take our organizations that have really strong ability to bring change in, and they sort of grow out of it by all the incentives that are in place. And what I wonder is, how do you shift the incentives or whatever you need to do to start to continue to encourage people to do what you're talking about doing, which is still trying to do something new every day?
Yeah, and I think that like so this is another thing that I touch upon too, is that the way we understand novelty is
Mm-hmm.
it's fundamentally fallacious
Mm,
because multiple things are true at the same time. On the one hand, novelty is infinitely available to us because
mm,
of the variety and the complexity that exists in the modern world.
mm-hmm.
And also, there is nothing new under the sun.
Mm,
And that exists is a synthesis or a transmutation of something else. So
mm-hmm.
and I think that that is a really powerful invitation to understand that it's not as much tension as it is a lack of integration between things that are actually two sides of the same coin.
Mm,
It's not a tug of war, it's a coin flip.
yeah.
And the sooner we can grasp that, because I think the people who are really attached to the status quo,
Mm-hmm.
either because they always have been, or because they started out disruptive, got into a place where now the status quo actually benefits them, and now they're like, "Oh, this is good, actually. Oh, that's great."
Yeah.
I think that what they persistently fail to understand is the role that they can play in the next version of the status quo, because
Mm,
that's what it is.
yeah.
Because unfettered chaos and constant change is fundamentally untenable.
Right.
And the point of doing something new is it shows you what stays the same.
Mm,
Because the thing is, our brains are wired to ignore things that are old information
mm-hmm.
because we have been wired for survival. And if
Right.
something has killed us before, it's very unlikely, our brain tells us, that
Yeah.
it'll kill us later.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like a smell that you get used to, like your brain just stops noticing it until
Mm-hmm.
somebody walks through the door and goes, "Oh, bloody hell, what the fuck is that? Excuse
Yeah.
me.
No
Use
worries.
just casual profanity.
Yeah.
Um, so that's what it takes sometimes, right?
Hmm.
And what we need to do if we're following that analogy is to open the door and let other people walk through.
Mm. Hmm. That's really interesting. God, it reminds me of almost every company I worked at. I worked in advertising, 26 years, and it would just be really almost funny. Like you'd be working, and you kind of the first day you have that feeling like, what the hell? It stinks in here. And then, like, 6 months later, you're like, okay, all right, this is just what we do. And then in advertising, you get a lot of freelancers and contractors you work with. And inevitably, some freelancer walks in and goes, what the fuck is this place? What are you doing? And you're just like, oh, yeah, I remember that. But it's useful in the sense that at least you go, okay, maybe I can tweak that. Maybe I can change that. Maybe I can, so I like that analogy of like, I invite some new folks in. Now, assuming I'm somebody who is in charge of a system that I'm quite enjoying as it is. Now, of course, I'm inviting some new people in the sense that I'm hiring people and blah, blah, blah. But I'm also probably creating process that tries to very quickly turn them into part of the machine as opposed to, bringing anything new to the table. So how do you change that dynamic?
Oh, again,
Piece of
real.
cake.
We'll be having coffee after this in no time.
Yeah.
Um, I think that what it comes down to fundamentally is a matter of humility.
Mm-hmm.
Being able to, because one thing that I am always very wary of, and across the board really, is when somebody is so comfortable in their certainty that
Mm-hmm.
they are willing to accept the ways in which they can be wrong.
Mm.
So if you are in that, position of comfortability, that you're happy with how things are,
Mm-hmm.
consider where that perspective comes from.
Mm.
Is there something that you're not noticing
Yeah.
because it's you've gotten used to that now
Mm-hmm.
just part and parcel of the scent of the place, but really what you need to do is open a window, you know?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So I think that humility is really important. Being able to understand how you're wrong is a huge part of that. And also, uh, as they say in the British transport system, mind your gaps.
Yes.
We all have them,
Uh-huh.
and I think that we tend to create a lot of stories to insulate ourselves from our gaps, but
Mm-hmm.
others see them plenty.
Yeah.
So it's really about surrounding yourself with a good, well-rounded group of people who understand you, who understand your vision, and also aren't afraid to hold you accountable
Mm.
and kind of constantly call you to that higher version of yourself.
Yeah.
Because once you're comfortable, it's very likely you're going to stop doing all of the things that gave you that competitive advantage to be
Mm-hmm.
able to get to a place of being comfortable. And then what's
Yeah.
going to happen is months down the line, you're going to be in full, like, burning platform mode where you're like, oh, yeah, like everything's on fire. And how did this happen? And
Mm-hmm.
the thing, like, because we are all systems, our businesses are all systems, we're all living in a whole entangled mess of systems.
Mm-hmm.
Um, all of these little and larger interdependencies and the consequences of these interdependencies, those are the things that cumulatively add up over time,
Mm-hmm.
up until the point that they become unignorable.
Yeah.
Happens is most people, because they're comfortable and ergo complacent, are
Mm-hmm.
happy to do those things until it's a big, like, wildfire.
Yeah.
And then at that point, like, you need a lot more hoses to put it out. Whereas
Mm-hmm.
if you just monitor it through the ways that we spoke about, minding your gaps, accountability, then these things take you less by surprise and you're better prepared to contend with them.
Mm. So, in the work you do, you show up somewhere and you start talking about some of these things that you're recommending that would be beneficial. What's the kind of reaction you're getting from leaders of organizations when you tell them that they need to mind their gaps and make sure they're surrounded by folks who are willing to call them out on their BS sometimes?
Well, see, I'm very smart about this. I don't start. My whole thing is always lull them into a false sense of false sense of security,
Yeah.
because the thing is, a lot of business leaders respond very powerfully to more tangible things.
Hmm.
And the thing is, your process or lack thereof, your platforms or lack thereof, your people or lack thereof, all
Hmm.
three of things have very tangible consequences and impacts
Hmm.
for not only your financial position, but also for the culture of your company. I find
Hmm.
it hilarious when people talk about culture as if it's like this esoteric thing. No, it is the systemic interaction of all of the things in your business. That's what makes the culture. You
Hmm.
can call it whatever the bloody hell you want,
Right.
but at worst you'll be, delusional, and
Hmm.
at best you'll just be slightly off target.
Right.
Um, so I always start there because
Hmm.
then it's like it's easier to get them on board to be like, hey, so this process that you have in place that's basically just error checking, another error checking process, and it's costing you this much in people power to be able to execute it, and it's
Hmm.
having this impact on your customers who are leaving you in droves, and then this is the financial impact of that. When
Hmm.
I coach them with that language, they are automatically more amenable to it,
Yeah. Hmm.
And then once they see the very real benefits of talking about things
Hmm.
as if they are systems, because they are, then they go to a point where, we have that understanding, we have that rapport,
Yeah.
and then it can kind of, start pulling the thread of some of those perspectives too.
Mm.
Yeah.
So, talking a lot about the big stuff, the big systems, and maybe the leaders at the head of that. And I think, okay, if I'm just a regular person, going to do my job in these systems, what can I do to make things better for me and the few folks around me where I don't necessarily have impact over the larger thing? How do I connect and make things better?
Yeah. I mean, look, for better or for worse, especially where we're talking about larger corporations, they all act as if the various departments are pretty much semi-autonomous, like the
Hmm.
right the left hand is doing,
Yep.
and then just hoping that the body will know when to clap. And it's just like how it works.
Yeah.
Um, but the thing is, one almost I don't want to call it a benefit, but one way in which we can leverage this weakness, if you will,
Hmm.
that because a lot of departments and teams tend to kind of keep to themselves and then do a bit of like cross silo,
Hmm.
cross function things every now and again.
Hmm.
Um, One thing that I would say is look in your immediate vicinity. If you know something is broken or
Hmm.
upon, express that.
Hmm.
And is like, I will never be a proponent of do free labor because, like, come on, you're getting paid for a job, right? But
Right.
at the same time, if there are circumstances or certain dynamics that are making it difficult for you to do that job, then
Hmm.
you owe your own energy effectiveness,
Hmm.
if nothing else,
Yeah.
right? Because it is like you can do the same job and it can either be a walk through molasses or just like, a leisurely autumn stroll over some leaves, right? And it's
Hmm.
just you get to choose what that looks like for you, and definitely like engage your managers as much as you can, and
Hmm.
make your voice heard, and I think lot of the problems that exist in organizations go unnoticed or unaddressed because someone somewhere who knows the problem exists
Hmm.
has to stop talking about it or
Yeah.
not,
Hmm.
right? That gets into a wider question of like, okay, what do those information flows look like
Mm.
with the company itself? To what extent is there that cross-functional collaboration? So
Hmm.
not what is in your vicinity that you can improve that will make your life easier,
Right.
um, but also see what bridges you can build with other parts of that same company that perhaps haven't been explored before. And then once you start coming together and you start creating this, mutual benefit, that
Hmm.
will get noticed.
Yeah.
That so yeah, it starts with speaking and then the next step is doing.
Mm. I like that. I mean, that's such a very simple way of talking about how so much gets done. And I like the notion of that obviously creates a sense of agency for anybody. And what I wonder in that a little bit is, we started by talking about the ways you can kind of top down affect change within organizations, and this feels a little more bottom up. Do you need both happening, or is that how
Yes,
that works? Yeah.
absolutely. You need both. And
Hmm.
the thing is, like, the other thing I'm constantly wary of are binaries,
Okay.
because there are so few things in such a nuanced and dynamic world that are this or that.
Hmm.
The overwhelming majority of things are both and.
Right.
Um, and you need to have that, bottom up mobilization, and you also need to have that top down mobilization. And at some
Hmm.
point, there will be a little bit of tension and when they meet in the
Yeah.
middle,
Hmm.
but that tension comes from the contention that these people want different things, and that's not true.
Mm.
Because they actually want what the people who are at the bottom want is they want to be able to stay in a job that pays their bills,
Hmm.
that doesn't drive them absolutely bananas. And what people at the top want is to stay in a business that treats them well, that doesn't drive them absolutely
Yeah.
bananas. So it's really, they have more in common than they are different. But I
Mm.
think that it's this forced dichotomy between
Yeah.
the two leads us to put like overinflate the difference
Mm.
rather than being able to find that common denominator, because at the end of the day everyone who's in a company wants the company to do well,
Hmm.
right? Whether because they get a nice bonus from it, or they get to continue to be gainfully employed,
Hmm.
because Lord knows entrepreneurship is not for the faint-hearted.
True.
So if you find a company you like that treats you well, that pays you well, by all means, like stay the course in that.
Hmm.
Um, so it's really about understanding like what that common ground is. And
Mm.
there
Yeah. It's interesting because I would guess that most folks don't think there's that much common ground there, and that the experience feels like there's not common ground because this maybe goes back to your binary observation that as much as binaries are rare in the sense that things are truly black and white, there our brain likes to create them because they make us feel like we understand things and we feel safe in our side of that binary. So it's like inevitably, it's like they don't want what I want, right? And if that's sort of the water we're swimming in, right, within organizations, what can help us realize that we're actually like swimming right next to each other and going in the same direction? Like, is there anything that helps folks see like actually no, we do all want something very similar here?
doing new things together.
Mm, okay. What does that look like?
Because the thing is, we get so pigeonholed into our roles and what it is that we believe we do and how we
Hmm.
got where we want to go,
Yeah.
that we forget that we're all sharing this one human experience.
Hmm.
That forgetting that makes it so difficult to find that synchronicity, to find that common ground. But
Hmm.
once doing new things together, yes, it may appear to be frivolous or just for kicks or just for
Hmm.
fun, but I
Yeah.
can assure you this is very, very serious play.
Yeah.
Because when you see each other going through those motions, that you can recognize in other people the things that you see in yourself.
Hmm.
And that's really the thread you need to follow in order to be able to kind of bring everyone alongside.
Yeah.
And the other is in the process of watching other, like, there is nothing that demonstrates the raw nature of your mental models the same way that doing something for the first time does.
Mm.
Because when you do something for the first time, all of the expectations you have of that are a function of your assumptions.
Hmm.
All of them.
Yeah.
And only after you've done something for the first time and then you do it again and again and again, that you now have data points
Right.
that you then draw on to make a either informed or fallacious conclusion, because
Hmm.
Lord knows, like, um, and but it's before you manage to amass that level of data, it's that first data point that
Hmm.
really powerful mirror for the things that you believe to be true.
Mm.
When you do that in a group with other people, you get to hold that mirror up to each other, but in a
Hmm.
way it's not going to inspire defensiveness
Right.
or not going to become, this whole internalized thing about like, oh, I'm this kind of person, I'm that kind of person. Because you've
Hmm.
only done it for the first time.
Right.
Let yourself suck at it. Who
Yeah.
cares?
Yeah. So what are examples of things that you might try together in that situation? Anything that you've seen work well?
So, unsurprisingly, in my book, I offer 30 prompts for
Hmm.
people to do things with ease and joy. And
Mm.
they are things that they can do either as individuals or as families or as organizations.
Mm.
And I am in the process of revising and relaunching the book because my original plan was to write two books.
Mm.
And after adding on another 500 new experiences, I'm like, actually, the world doesn't need another book from me. This one is perfectly excellent, once it gets revised, because what I need to do is start talking about these things, is
Mm.
start to shepherd people through this,
Hmm.
writing another book that's just going to sit on a shelf somewhere. Like, it's
Okay.
meant something that's meant to be lived,
Right.
right?
Hmm.
So yeah, so this is something that as a well-being initiative is a really, really powerful starting point for
Hmm.
organizations, because especially if they have been finding themselves in this situation where they're just constantly regurgitating and revisiting the same problems again and again, that's
Hmm.
a really powerful invitation
Yeah.
to look at it differently.
Hmm. Mm. So is that what the book offers, is some of these prompts to kind of view things from a different perspective?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So there's 30 of those now. The revision is going to have 42 because I will always remain a giant Douglas Adams fan.
Okay.
Um, and, and also in the process of continuing to do new things in the way I have,
Yeah.
I've noticed a lot of what stays the same. And frankly, it's not acceptable to me.
Mm.
Not and not for anyone else. So
Mm.
a lot of the revision of the book is going to be about inviting us to not only understand ourselves in these new ways,
Yeah.
um, but also step outside of ourselves to understand the other things that we contribute to and are part of.
Mm.
ways and engage with them in new ways, in ways that, either and there's a lot of things that, you might do it for the first time. And you're like, yep, that was cool. Never going to do that again. I have many of those, you know?
Yeah.
And then there's a lot of news that open just a whole hallway of doors
Hmm.
for that you perhaps wouldn't have otherwise walked down. But I think
Yeah.
that that's where those shifts come from, not only for you, but also the organization and beyond.
Mm. What are some of the new things that you've been trying here over the last few years?
Oh, wow. So I actually have two notebooks. So my I kind of like what I've started calling it live action journaling because that's like pretty much what it is. So my record of the new thing I've done every day is because I'm a huge Trekkie. I called it the captain's log.
Hmm.
So on my second log, it's about finished, and the third one's going to start in early 2025. So I'm like
Hmm.
super. But it's been everything from like my first black sand beach to delivering that speech to the lead city council. That was my new thing last week.
Yeah.
I haven't done anything like that before. When I
Yeah.
was living in New York, I never did anything to do with local politics or really gave it a whole bunch of energy or attention. And I think that like it's your local environment that has the most profound impact on you.
Mm. Yeah.
It would behoove us to be aware of what's happening in it
Mm.
and be able to lend our brain, face, and voice to the things that are happening in it and kind of informing them in ways that it can be better for not only ourselves, but the wider community as well.
Hmm.
So, yeah. And then sometimes, like, it's not always this like grand, ostentatious thing. Like, you don't
Right.
get a 1,200 day streak doing something huge every single day. Like, I've even done things like, dance while washing the dishes. But
Hmm.
even that in itself, like, opened up this whole exploration of like, what does novelty actually mean to me?
Mm.
And what are the lessons that I'm trying to instill in myself and the learnings that I'm trying to instill in myself by
Hmm.
living this way?
Yeah.
And how do I too?
Mm.
So,
And what's changed for you by doing this practice every day?
oh God, everything,
Mm.
everything.
Yeah.
So the reason why I started was, as I mentioned, to manage my own mental and emotional well-being. And I remember the way it started was I was working in a small startup, and at that time, had had a whole decade of horrible Octobers. I'm
Mm.
talking like trauma, people dropping dead, like
Mm.
all sorts,
Wow.
and I got on a call on September 30th, 2021.
Okay.
And I said to my team, I was like, look, because we had created a very psychologically safe environment, a
Hmm.
very open environment. So I felt like I could be honest with them. I was like, look,
Mm.
Octobers for me have historically been really freaking shitty.
Yeah.
Um, to try to carry on and do the best I can, but I just want you all to know that like I'm navigating these waters for myself.
Hmm.
And basically we're like, okay, well, what do you need? And I had heard a random like podcast snippet in passing of one of some guy. It's so funny how things are so formative, just like fall off in the details.
Uh-huh.
Um, and he was talking about how, as a part of engaging, the people that he was working with, they came up with a safe word. So
Okay.
any that he was like being too aggressive or being too, because they had done like, one of those like um corporate well-being programs together,
Hmm.
and they were talking about like their limiting beliefs and all of these
Hmm.
other things. So kind of the next stop from that after
Hmm.
the doing.
Yeah.
So he was like, if I start embodying those things, I want you all to feel comfortable saying it to me. But I understand that sometimes it's hard to be able to say something straight up to the person who signs your check, literally or figuratively. So
Mm-hmm.
it's a safe word. So I, having just heard that, I was like, you know what? We're gonna have a safe word. It's gonna be called Geronimo. There we
Okay.
go. That's good.
Yeah.
Um, and actually, that's how the book starts. Is I wanted to write the finest opening line since Dickens, and I think I got kind of close because it literally the first sentence is the safe word is Geronimo. Um, and after I hung up from that call, I was like, I never want to do this shit again.
Mm,
Like, I was in a perfectly understanding and open environment, and I felt supported and I felt all these positive things,
mm-hmm.
but I don't want to live life like that.
Mm,
So at that moment that I asked myself the question that changed literally everything, and it was, what is the biggest lie my brain is telling me?
mm,
That is a question that every single person on planet Earth should
mm-hmm.
ask themselves at least once,
Yeah.
if not like quarterly.
Yeah.
You know? And the answer that was immediately available to me was, it will always be the same.
Mm,
I decided to give myself empirical proof that it couldn't possibly always be the same. I
right.
do a new thing every day for,
Mm-hmm.
like I said, a 30-day experiment that then
Yeah.
escalates to a lifelong thing.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so the long answer to your very pithy question was, everything's changed.
Yeah.
And because this whole thing was designed to change everything.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, first of all, that question is fascinating. I mean, I, I'll need to ponder that one a little bit because I'm sitting here like, what is the biggest lie I'm telling myself? I don't know the answer to that immediately, but it feels like a great question because it kind of comes back to just the idea of the stories we create to kind of keep ourselves safe and comfortable. Um, it's natural. We probably start doing it as soon as our thought process is sophisticated enough as a very young human. Um, but what is it keeping us from knowing? And then what is it keeping us from doing that we should be doing? Right. And so for you, what I hear is it actually invited you to not only experiment with the idea of novelty and change, but to now sort of really embrace and really fall in love with it is what I'm hearing from you. That it suddenly became like, instead of everything will always be the same, it's like, no, it won't, and thank goodness, because look at what I'm learning and how I'm growing as a result of it. Does that feel accurate for you?
Yeah, absolutely. And as I mentioned earlier, it also has given me a very profound sense of what stays the same.
Mm,
And it's like, what are the things that I believe about those things that stay the same?
mm,
And in what ways do I encourage those things to stay the same? And you know what? Sometimes there's like maybe a couple of things that I've noticed that stay the same. And I'm like, actually, I would love for that to never change.
mm.
And those are the things that are the deepest parts of the embodiment of the love of human experience
Mm,
that I want to be able to experience at some point, because
hmm.
um, it's not true that change is the only constant in life.
Right.
The only constant in life is transitions,
Mm,
and transition and still not change.
mm. What is something that you don't want to change?
So, my relationship with my sister,
Mm,
she my absolute best friends, and I adore her to bits. She
hmm,
is who I share myself with.
hmm,
Um, and a lot of the things that I don't want to change are relationships with
hmm.
other, and
Yeah.
that doesn't mean that I'm resistant to them changing, because of course everything evolves in
Hmm,
some form. But being mindful of what parts of those things that are the most precious to me that I
mm.
want,
Yeah.
how can I ensure the protection and the growth of those things through my habits,
Mm-hmm.
through that I accrue, through the way that I communicate,
Yeah.
you know, for all of the questions that come up. So it's not only a really, really incredible invitation to explore novelty, but
Mm-hmm.
also the purpose of doing so is
Mm-hmm.
so that you become really, really dialed in to the person you are, the things you want, and the way you will go about
Mm.
on.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting because what you're describing is the outcome that I think many of us want when we resist change, meaning we're trying to hold on to what we intuitively understand are those things that really matter to us, whether it is the relationships in our lives or the connections in our lives, or it could be a relationship to a place or something like that. Like we intuitively know, I think, that there are certain things that we want with us at all times, and maybe that causes us to just cast a net around everything. And what you're observing is by experimenting with change and novelty and trying to change things, it sort of settles the most important stones down to the bottom and allows you to kind of play with the rest of them and experiment with them, which is really interesting, right? It's again, this is a paradox that shows up in life all the time, right? It's like you do the thing um, by not doing you do the thing that actually keeps you from actually getting what you want, and you actually have to do what seems paradoxical and opposite of that to actually get it. So, what I wonder is, one, how do you just we talked about organization, so I'd love to, it'd be interesting how we can invite more of that into organizations so organizations can get really clear on what sort of, again, it's like a sifting mechanism, what really matters. And in the context of that, the question you mentioned, the what lie am I telling myself? Um, is that something that can be as effective within an organizational setting?
Hell yeah, it is.
Yeah.
Hell yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Because because since we're all systems living in systems, like the thing that underlies that is the bedrock of any system are the paradigms that comprise it.
Yeah.
That those are the things that create the relationships, that create the structure, that create the behavior that you see in the system, whether
Mm-hmm.
that is whether that's an organization, whether that's a goddamn government.
Mm-hmm.
um and the thing is, with these particular paradigms, not all of them are sound.
Yeah.
Them are straight up just, you know, total tosh,
Yeah.
right? It's just been accepted as truth
Sure.
because of the person who's spoken it, because it's been like that so long and it's endured so long that we elevate it to the status of truth when
Mm,
actually it is a ruin, and we
mm,
don't fix that.
interesting. I like that. Yeah.
So so yeah, so I think that like it's even more important to do this on ever wider scales, because
Hmm.
then collectively see
Yeah.
what are those lies that we have accepted as truth.
Mm, hmm.
There's
I like it.
always at least a handful of them. Trust and believe.
Yeah. No, I think it's fascinating. I mean, I can imagine doing it individually. I can imagine doing it as a couple or within a family, or like every structure uh, merits that question to just see what is really true as a result of acknowledging the lie. Um, so I have a question for you from a previous guest.
Go
So
for it.
our previous guest was a woman named Siobhan McHale, and she was really drawn to kind of your call to action, I guess it is, where you talk about doing new things with ease and joy. And I've heard you use that kind of language here. And so she was curious, as you enter organizations to do a lot of the work and you're asking them to implement new systems, how do you do that so that they can feel that ease and joy in that experience? Because I imagine for a lot of folks, it doesn't feel like it's going to be easy or joyful.
Yeah, especially if somebody has been struggling for a long time, or if there has been a lot of tension for a long time, even the departure from that tension
Hmm.
can feel existential,
Yeah.
right?
Hmm.
Um, but it's really about starting with the people. Always first and foremost, start with the people and
Hmm.
help understand what changes when things change.
Mm.
Because when they can see the benefit that they will personally get or that the organization will personally get, because change is hard. It
Yeah.
is. Even though, we have all of these adages about it, humans are actually really bad at change
Hmm.
generally.
Yeah.
So it's always grounding it in the benefits and what that transformation offers them first,
Hmm.
and also setting their expectation accordingly.
Yeah.
Be like, ease and joy is the goal, right? It is the road that we are walking.
Hmm.
But this is almost always true, and this is one of the very many hills I will die on any day of the week. Um, the road to the things that you want is littered with the things that you don't.
Hmm.
So don't let those, pieces of rubbish or like large rocks or things like that stop
Hmm.
you
Yeah.
when you where it is you want to go.
Mm.
So
Yeah. That definitely connects because I mean, you talked about entrepreneurship before, and I'm like, I see some of that. You're walking this path towards what you want, and these things come at you, and you're like, I don't want you. Get out of my way, and it can make you want to not keep walking the path. So it's a helpful reminder that like, okay, I'm probably on the right path because I'm noticing those things. Yeah,
absolutely. I have
yeah,
like a great little thing about entrepreneurship too. Again, another hill I will die on any day of the week. I should
yeah.
probably live in a less hilly place before I um but entrepreneurship is a fancy word for making shit up as you go along.
it,
Not a
sure,
good.
it certainly feels that way.
And the thing is, it doesn't matter how like grand your business plan is or how
Right,
much VC funding you had or
right.
whatever, right?
Hmm.
It's things feel chaotic to us and that we're always reacting to them
Yeah,
because we have perfect information.
right.
If we had perfect information, the
Hmm.
things that look like random, we would actually be able to see where they start.
Mm.
Because we are so far removed from the origin of that thing,
Yeah.
our our experience of it is random.
Mm.
So that's the thing. It's like it's imperfect information, which is partially by design in our present society, and also partially by accident too.
Yeah.
And
Hmm.
it's because when you look at the way things are currently exist, it's competition that is the name of the game. So
Right.
competition by its very nature will encourage you to withhold information.
Mm. That's a good point. Yeah.
So it's like that's why. That's
Mm.
why it feels like you're always making shit up as you go along because you are.
Yeah.
But you're doing that not because you're not visionary, not because you're not action oriented, not because you're any of these wonderful things we all want to be.
Hmm.
It's because that's the nature of the beast.
Yeah.
But
Mm.
once you accept that, you can also give yourself grace for it too.
Yeah. Mm. That's really helpful. That's awesome.
I'm glad. I
Yeah.
aim to
Yeah,
truly.
no, it is. It's just it's a good reminder, and I think that applies beyond entrepreneurship. It's just like trying to make your way in the world, you know. Um, I'd love to give you a chance to ask our next guest a question. So his name is Willie Peterson. He's a really fascinating guy. He was a CEO for years, and now he's a professor at Columbia Business School. He's written a book or books, and he's just this fascinating character. Do you have a question I can share with him for the next call?
Yeah, absolutely. Of course, because I am and will always stay a facetious bastard. I was like, I want to ask him because I spent a lot of time on Columbia's campus. It was like literally right across the
Ah,
street. The degree also says Columbia University on it.
yeah.
Um, and I used to spend a lot of time at like the business school because, spoiler alert, they had the best library and they also had the best like little like cafe thing. So a part
Mm.
of Oh, I should ask him. How come yours has all the nice things? That's not my actual question.
Yeah.
I need to ask him the same question we have been pondering amongst ourselves is what does he believe we have gotten wrong
Mm.
about how things are, and how is that preventing us from unlocking how things could be?
Mm. That's cool. I think he'll have a really interesting answer to that because he's a very thoughtful person. But I'm
Absolutely. I
curious.
mean, oh,
I'm
sorry.
very curious. I'm just very curious where he goes with that because it's a very, it's the kind of question you could ponder for days, you know. So I appreciate that question. I will pass it along to him. Before we get into a couple of our final questions, one of the things I noticed on your bio is that you have nearly perfect auditory recall. So you actually can like remember songs from languages you don't speak. And the question that came up for me is like, is there something you remember that you wish you didn't?
Oh God, all my college physics lectures.
Yeah. Are they just dancing in your head now, like showing up? Like, is that how it
Yeah.
works?
And of course, it just like, so my professor, bless him, lovely man, but he had this way of saying Wednesday. He would say Wednesday. So
Hmm.
every single Wednesday, I'm like, oh, happy Wednesday to
Oh,
everybody.
God.
You know what? He's just like probably retired, chilling on a beach somewhere. And I'm just
Yeah.
like, yeah, Wednesday, everybody. What's
Isn't
up?
that fascinating, though? Like, how, you know, you may have no idea that has like burned into your brain, is sitting with you to this day. And, um, you know, in some ways, I think those are like the really cool things about life is that these like kind of random little bits that get transferred between us can hang around and like we're making an impact in the silly ways, not just the grand ways, which we're always like, let's leave my legacy and blah, blah, blah. But it's like, I think I would imagine that somebody would feel pretty cool that somebody remembers the quirky way they say Wednesday, like it's just like, wow, a little piece of me is traveling off in the world. That's kind of cool.
That's the thing, TJ. We always leave a little piece of us with every single person we encounter.
Yeah, yeah. I
And
think we
it's like
forget that.
we forget that. And we also underestimate the profundity of the impact that we can have.
Yeah.
We think that big impact only comes from big things. There
Hmm.
are things that I have said flippantly and in passing
Hmm.
that people have written on post-its and whacked on their walls
Right.
as like a way to just remember, a mantra to live by. And
Hmm.
when they tell me that, I'm just like, first of all, humbled
Yeah.
and grateful that they shared that impact, which, by the way, folks, if you're really impacted by somebody, please tell them.
Yes.
Oh,
Yes.
I
Hmm.
think really something that we wait until somebody is dead to eulogize them. Why
Hmm.
don't people living their flowers?
Mm.
But that's like a whole other, rabbit hole. So I'll leave you with that. But
Yeah.
um, yeah, there is there's not a direct linear relationship between the size of the seed that you plant
Hmm.
and the grandness of the thing that grows from it.
Yeah.
Uh, and also sometimes things are just bamboo,
Hmm.
it's not doing anything for a really long time, and then all of a sudden you go back 2 days later and it's grown. So where the hell did that come from? So,
Yeah.
just continue to air your mental models, share
Hmm.
the things learned, be
Yeah.
willing to accept learnings back from other people. And
Hmm.
it's through that reciprocity that we all get to transcend who we are and uncover more of who we can become.
Yeah. I love that. And to just come back to your point about letting people know that somebody's impacted you, more immediately than at the eulogy. My brain goes to like the ripple effect of that in all of our systems. And we're talking about how we're just intertwined in all these massive systems. Just something as simple as that becoming more of a norm, like the change that can happen from that. Because we don't know the impact we make. And for whatever reason, our brain tells us to be stingy with the acknowledgement of that. Again, there's probably some weird evolutionary reason for it, but I don't know if it's serving us anymore. So I hope we see a little more of that. Speaking of things I would love to see more of, or what you would love to see more of, if you could wave a magic wand, and we've talked a lot about ways of impacting the world of work, if you could create a fully desuckified work world, what does that look like to you?
One where every single business exists to encourage health, information, and autonomy, not only for the people within it, but in the communities it serves and the customers it serves. And heck, even, because like none of us getting anything if those losers don't get anything. So
it's a fair point. No, it's a good point. I mean, that's okay to share the wealth a little bit. Yeah. And I think it's a pretty nice goal. It's hard to argue with that one. Are you optimistic about creating that world?
Oh, TJ, I refuse to be optimistic about anything.
Okay.
And I know that sounds like a really negative thing to say.
Mm-hmm.
But the truth of the matter is, I think that there is just a little bit of delusion that you need to sprinkle in to be properly optimistic.
Yeah.
And though I can honor that and I can accept that, it's not something that I can ever inspire in myself.
Interesting.
I'm like, okay, well, yeah, sure. Sometimes Delulu is the Salulu, but like, what is what am I missing out on by not seeing things as they are? So for me, it's like, I don't think optimist or pessimist or realist, like any of these are actually useful labels. I just know what it is I need to do. I'm going to continue bloody doing it until I can't anymore.
Yeah, I like that. Okay. Well, speaking of doing things, the next question I have for you is, I use a lot of sound effects in this show, and I've invited all of my guests to join the chorus of all this beautiful sound in the world. And I invite you to do the same. Do you have a desuckified sound that you'd like to make for us?
Well, it's funny because when I was considering this, I was like, I actually want to make a sound that represents desuckification.
Okay.
So that when we encounter it, we can find something to laugh about. Because I think I'm a firm believer that anything that can be laughed about can be overcome. So with that, my sound is womp, womp, womp.
I love that sound. I love that sound just honestly for how it sounds. It's just, it does something, but man, we are experiencing that sound, even maybe not literally, but figuratively quite often. Going back to, we'll always have jobs. But I like the idea of even just inviting people to hear that in their heads a little bit, or even make it out loud a little wah, 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 when things are just kind of shitty. Because you're right. I mean, the power of laughter it's one of the greatest powers we have. It is medicine, like it's such a cliche, but like for a reason, like it's about as visceral as it gets.
Yep.
Yeah. So how can people stay on top of what you're doing in the world? What's the best ways for folks to connect with you online?
So social media wise, I'm mostly on LinkedIn. So
Okay.
you can connect, send me a DM. As part of the regeneration I spoke about of myself and my business, I will shortly be launching a new website,
Awesome.
asmara.com. So you can get all of the things that I'm working on and more there,
Hmm.
probably the next month or so.
Okay.
But in the term, LinkedIn is where it's at.
Awesome. Well, I will be sure to include the LinkedIn link as well as the site just so that people have it at the ready once it goes live. And thank you for coming on the show. This was so much fun. I love a conversation like this that not only is fun in the moment, but I know I'm going to be carrying around with me in my head for a long time to just ponder some of these things. And I look forward to figuring out what the big lie is that I'm currently living with that I can help me to see the world a little differently by acknowledging it.
Love. And if you feel inclined to do so, definitely do share it with me too, because
Yeah, for
there's
sure.
nothing I enjoy more than inspiring and relishing in people's epiphanies. So
Yeah,
do
I will do that. Well, Asmara, thank you so much for coming on the show, and I look forward to staying connected to all the wonderful work you're doing in the world.
thank you. Likewise. It was a
Awesome.
pleasure.
Bye bye. Thanks, everyone, for tuning in to the DesuckifyWork Podcast. And a huge thanks to Asmara for bringing a powerful new way of thinking to the show. If you enjoyed the episode, please like, share, rate, review, subscribe, or consider asking Santa if you can borrow his sleigh so you can deliver Desuckify Work t-shirts, socks, and mugs to all the not-so-good boys and girls that make work way more painful than it should be. You can follow Asmara on LinkedIn and keep an eye out for her upcoming site, ParadigmPlayground.com. I can't wait for it to go live. You shouldn't wait to check out my site and my Substack newsletter. I'm on a mission to make work suck less, and I'd love for you to join me. Want to make that desuckification happen ASAP? Let's set up a free half-hour coaching session. Bye, everyone.